Hello, and welcome to the AAMFT podcast, your all-access pass to the latest news, developments, and thought leaders in the world of systemic therapy. We strive to relate, educate, and innovate, one episode at a time. I'm your host, Dr. Eli Karam, and we're brought to you by the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy. Our podcast explores topics that relationship-based therapists care about. In addition to featuring unique conversations and interviews with established experts, our show provides information and education on direct practice and emerging trends in the MFT profession. For more information, please visit us at aamft.org. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show. The couples and families that we see may experience any number of barriers to in-person traditional therapy, including scheduling difficulties, childcare needs, and the stigma associated with getting help. Providing couple and family treatment via telehealth, however, can address these obstacles and improve overall accessibility to our services. In our post-COVID world, we may still be unsure of how to alter our current treatment approach to best adapt to this remote delivery. Further, there's often specific concerns of how to handle safety concerns or high conflict systems via telehealth. Yet, there are many creative, practical, and innovative ways to intervene in teletherapy that go beyond traditional face-to-face talk therapy. So in this installment of the AAMFT podcast, I'm going to sit down with the editor of the new book, The Therapist Notebook for Systemic Teletherapy, Creative Interventions for Effective Online Therapy. And we're going to explore both new intervention strategies and ways to adapt traditional in-person therapy interventions for telehealth. This book is arranged into 40 chapters, 7 parts, including setup and preparation, self of therapist, specific sections dealing with children and adolescents, adults, intimate romantic relationships, families, and training and supervision, which we'll talk about today. Leading experts from around the globe provide step-by-step guidelines on setups, processing, and a lot of practical suggestions for follow-up interventions that are grounded within the foundational theories and models that we all know and love. We're going to do that today with the editor, Becky Cobb. She is a clinical professor for Seattle University's Master of Arts in Couples and Family Therapy program. She has her own Seattle-based practice where she provides supervision as an AAMFT approved supervisor, and she mentors approved supervisor candidates. She's authored numerous journal articles and book chapters before tackling this large editing project. And she's a former president of the Washington Association for Marriage and Family Therapy, AAMFT. She's been awarded and recognized by the AAMFT, AAMFT, and the National Council on Family Relations, NCFR. When she isn't working, she enjoys hot yoga, hiking with her Aussie Doodle, and spending time with her partner and the two small humans, her children, attempting to make her a morning person, as she says. I learned so much to adapt to what I'm already doing in telehealth today, so I think you will pick up some new information and reaffirm what you've already been doing well. We'll be back after the interview. Becky Cobb, welcome to the AAMFT podcast. I'm so happy to have you here today. This show has been running for 6 seasons now, 6 years. And when we started before the pandemic, I did not know many MFTs that could really tell you what telehealth is, much less Zoom or different types of non-face-to-face systemic therapy technology. And now it is commonplace in this post-COVID world, but there's been a lot of innovations and accommodations made in the last couple of years that led to you editing this great book that we're going to talk about today. But as always, the first question we like to know about our experts. So talk to us about your systemic therapy origin story, why you wanted to do this, and then specifically your gravitation toward telehealth that led to this book project.
Hi, Eli. Thanks so much for having me. So my undergraduate degree was in psychology, and it took me a while to figure out specifically what I wanted to do within that field in particular. So I took a year off after undergrad, and I took some courses from a local community college in drug and alcohol counseling. And those courses were taught by licensed marriage and family therapists. So ultimately, through this experience of this year off, I decided that drug and alcohol counseling specifically wasn't for me. But the way that the topic was discussed systemically really made sense to me. So I began to see how drug and alcohol use of an individual couldn't really fully be understood without examining the entire system. And then that transitioned into my releasing everything systemically, and it changed my whole way of seeing the world around me. So from there, I decided that couples and family therapy was the way to go for me. In terms of telehealth, I honestly didn't have any interest in working online until the pandemic. It's funny because I'm probably the least technologically savvy person that you'll ever meet. I actually had to have my partner come and help me get set up for the podcast recording platform before we started meeting. So I think it's hilarious that I'm the person who helped to create this book, and I'm doing a lot of teletherapy stuff now. But like a lot of people, I was really worried about the efficacy of online therapy, and I was worried about the lack of personal connection that occurs. And that I was worried about a lack of personal connection that maybe you would have in in-person interactions that wouldn't happen online. So really, it wasn't until I was forced into doing telehealth that I started to have an interest in it. And that, for like a lot of others, was right when the pandemic started. And I was just coming back from maternity leave when everything shifted online. And I wasn't back to work in my private practice at the time, but I had to transition all of the courses that I taught to an online format. And so I had taught some online courses before when I taught undergraduate classes at Purdue, but I hadn't taught any graduate courses online. And most of what I do in those classes is really experiential. So I was just at such a loss for how to do what I normally did in in-person classes in an online format. And one by one, I started thinking about how can I transfer each of these activities that I normally do to be able to work online. And with some creative thinking, we were able to successfully do every single role play or therapy intervention that we had traditionally done, person meetings, to the internet. And it took a while to figure all that stuff out. So I was really left wondering what other people were doing to creatively engage clients via online formats. And that's where I started doing a lot of research on this and started learning about what other people were doing to transition their practices from in-person to online format, and seeing what they were doing in really new and creative ways, and seeing what others had actually been doing for a really long time. Paul Springer and colleagues, for example, had been training clinicians in the delivery of telemental health since 2008, but I hadn't really paid a lot of attention to it until that point. So while my passion wasn't necessarily to work online, I really became inspired by what I saw others doing. And I saw a need to bring some of this work together into one place to create a resource for people like me who were really just feeling at a loss for how to creatively engage folks via what was a new format for many people.
Yeah, you, like a large portion of our audience and me as well, were forced to adapt. It's something that we didn't naturally gravitate to, but it's clearly something that's here to stay. And I also love what you said about your origin story. Once you think systemically, it's really hard to think any other way. I guess we should also clarify the language you used. The book's title that we'll talk about today is A Therapist's Notebook for Systemic Teletherapy. I use telehealth and teletherapy interchangeably. I think teletherapy is a form of telehealth, but how do you think of those words, and what words should we settle on today as we talk about this?
Yeah, it was hard for me in coming up with the book title and figuring out what the right terminology would be. I ended up settling on teletherapy specifically because I thought it was a little more particular, whereas telehealth, I think, can be therapy. It can be other forms of healthcare as well. I don't think that there is a right or a wrong, but I just use teletherapy because I think it's a little more specific to what the book is about.
Family therapy or systemic therapy, working with this idea of face-to-face, the verbals and the non-verbals, being in the room, creating an event. It used to be that the being there was so important to the experience. And I think one of the biggest personal challenges for me is I did not think you could do couple or family therapy via telehealth before this boom in the last 5 years with the pandemic. But I'm curious, in putting the book together, what do you think are some of the biggest myths that exist about doing relational work via telehealth with couples and families?
I think that a lot of people think that online therapy can just be talk therapy, that there's not a lot of room for creativity or engagement because you don't necessarily have the materials with you in the room. I'm thinking in particular about work with like children and adolescents where you might have toys in a play therapy room or something like that. Or a myth that connecting with clients or helping them to connect with one another is more challenging via this format. And I was one of those people who thought that initially too and had hesitance in this format because of that. But just through really jumping into it and seeing what others were doing and learning from other people, I learned that teletherapy can be really creative. I learned just how many amazing creative things people were doing. And I also learned that for the most part, therapists can really connect with clients in very intimate and therapeutic ways in online formats and help them to connect with one another. And it's just that it might look a little bit different when working via telehealth than in person.
Yeah, let's talk about those differences. What do you think the major accommodations and changes a systemic therapist should make when working with couples and families remotely as opposed to face-to-face?
Yeah. So Paul Springer, Nathan Taylor, and colleagues, they worked on a couple of chapters in this book that were aimed specifically at accommodations that therapists need to make in online therapy. And again, they've been doing this training for a really long time, since before most of us started doing online work. One chapter is on managing multiple therapeutic environments. So when you're working via telehealth, you need to be able to manage your own physical environment. For example, I am working from home today and I just asked my partner, can you make sure that the dogs don't bark during the podcast? So managing your own physical environment, also having to help clients manage their physical environments too, because they have their own physical space and their own distractions that might be present. And then you also have the online environment to manage, helping to navigate the technological pieces, both from your end and your client's ends. And these things become even more complex when you're working with couples and families, because the therapist might be working with client systems who are joining from multiple physical locations and who likewise face just as many additional opportunities for technological difficulties. So one of the key differences in online work is that therapists need to do a lot of prep work and talk with clients specifically about how to navigate some of these challenges, both preemptively and also when they actually occur. Lisa Renee Reynolds and Paul Springer and Nathan Taylor and Richard Bischoff and I also worked on another chapter together that was looking at building therapeutic relationships via teletherapy. So for example, we highlight how maintaining eye contact isn't necessarily possible via telehealth because you're looking at a computer or a camera, but not actually looking face to face into someone's eyes. But you can set up your computer and your camera and the windows on your computer screens to make it look as though you're maintaining eye contact via online sessions. There are some other things that you can do to help with those connections in online therapy, using verbal transparency, really monitoring your tone of voice, exaggerating facial expressions and body movements, and using client names to help make up for the lack of visual and auditory cues via online platforms. And while a lot of these skills are applicable in both in-person and online practices, they have really particular importance in telehealth, and they might look slightly different in practice in each of these settings. So one of the things that I tried to be really particular about in these chapters that are included in the book is also not having a lot of activities that would require clients to have certain materials. So that's one of the other things that looks a little bit different, I think, in online practice, that you might want to do certain interventions that clients might not have access to the materials for. And so while you might be able to coordinate with clients to acquire materials, or they might already have some of them, a lot of people won't necessarily have what they need, and asking them to buy more materials could be financially burdensome for many. So one of the things that I started doing when I shifted my courses online, and I was doing a lot of role play based activities in classes and online classes, is I started sending out care packages. I was worried that students wouldn't have the materials that they needed to conduct the activities that I planned to do. So our program funded sending small care packages to students in classes, each containing materials that they would need. And therapists can do this for clients too. So I recommend making therapeutic care packages in bulk containing materials that clients might need to conduct a number of different creative therapeutic interventions, and having them on hand to send to new clients, especially when working with young children and adolescents. And then with permission from adult clients, you can send worksheets, coloring pages, brown paper bags for making hand puppets, construction paper, googly eyes, pom-poms, yarn, crayons. I also recommend including a pack of Crayola has Colors of the World crayons that can provide greater arrays of colors to depict more diverse skin tones. And I really highlight this because this has been really impactful for people that I've seen receive these therapeutic care packages. And I've had several adults say that they had tears in their eyes when they saw this because they never had the right colors to use as a child to match their skin tone. And now they did. And that was really important for them.
Yeah, I love those ideas. And we could talk more about that when we talk about clinical innovations and creative experiential ways of working with couples and families, especially when there's children involved. You know, what strikes me is something you said there about the prep work. Now, normally if a couple or family is coming to see you face to face, you may send your paperwork ahead of time, but normally they show up, they get there early, you do your informed consent. It does strike me that interacting in a teletherapy setting with the technology, the prep work, as you said, is more. Is there a best practice on how to do that? Because you want that first session to go as smoothly as possible. And if there's glitches or you can't log on, it starts the whole endeavor in the not the best of light. It could possibly even prevent the alliance from being formed. So what are the best practices on prepping the client system before the initial telehealth session?
I think different people do this in different ways. Some people will send informational emails in advance to help people set up and to prepare them. Some people might do a preparatory or an initial meeting before doing the first therapy session. When working with children and adolescents, that might mean setting up an appointment, working with caregivers in advance to be able to make sure that everything is set up in a way that's really easy for kids, or having an adult on hand who can come help if technology is not working the way that it's supposed to during the session. I think that some people will do this in the first session, but I think that just being really transparent about that being part of the process of the first session can help to alleviate some of the frustration that some clients might experience if that's not what they're expecting. But I think that's really important to have these conversations preemptively, because you want to be able to have a game plan. So what happens if the client is in the middle of a crisis and the internet cuts out? What do you do? There are a lot of things that you can do in that situation. Even just knowing what is a good phone number that I can reach you at while we're getting the internet set back up again can be really helpful. Or if a child darts out of session and doesn't come back, who can you contact who you know was somewhere within the household so that they can help bring the kiddo back to the computer to make sure that you're able to continue doing the therapy session when maybe they've become distracted by something else.
That's a good segue into the specific ethical concerns or potential even legal concerns that you have to worry about when you're working remotely. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, there are two major ethical and legal concerns when conducting telehealth that come to mind for me. I think the biggest one is really licensure. Making sure that you're licensed in the jurisdiction in which you're physically located, but also the location in which your clients are physically located. And the details of all of this are pretty complex, but because there's temporary licensure and things like that. That is one of the most important, I think, legal concerns about doing telehealth that I still see a lot of therapists have a lot of questions about. I was very lucky that I have a colleague who is a licensed mental health counselor and also an attorney who wrote a chapter about this and who coached me on this stuff when the pandemic started and everything shifted online. The other thing that is a little bit different in telehealth is confidentiality. With that, the ethics and laws of confidentiality don't necessarily differ a ton between in-person and online therapy, but there are some nuances in the ways in which to maintain confidentiality that really, practically speaking, look different when working online. So, for example, not knowing who's in your client's physical space can be an issue. And it's really important to discuss that preemptively to work with clients to ensure confidentiality on their end of things as well at the onset of therapy.
Yeah. When someone comes into our room and we shut the door, we know there's no one else in there. We can control that. But in a remote setting, we don't know unless we ask the client and make that explicit. So I agree. Those are the two biggest areas. And we've had podcasts even recently where we've talked about portability laws, giving MFTs the ability to practice in different areas. But what comes with that is the responsibility of being licensed in those states and keeping up with all the requirements in that state. So while teletherapy and telehealth have given us the ability to practice and expand the geographic area, what we do, we still have to do it the right way. And I think a lot of times I'll see some clinicians saying, it was a pandemic and I started seeing people, or I had a client and they moved to another state. But really the legal and the ethical way to do that is to be licensed in that state where the client is residing. I think there's actually some benefits that exist with relational work via telehealth that maybe you could not get face to face. What do you think about that?
Oh, definitely. I will be honest. I think that there are some situations where face-to-face might be better for some particular clients, and some clients might want that or might need that for whatever reason. But there are so many benefits of doing couple and family work remotely, benefits both for clients and for therapists. The first thing that comes to mind as it relates to clients is just time. I know a lot of clients who didn't make the time for therapy before because it was really hard to navigate their schedules. But it's a lot easier for someone to schedule a therapy session in the middle of the day during a work break or lunch break, for example, without needing to factor in travel time. For families, partners, other relationships, this can be especially helpful for scheduling when navigating multiple schedules or people who are located in different locations. So, for example, therapists who are licensed in multiple states can do relational therapy sessions with clients who are located in different physical locations, making systemic therapy possible when it might not otherwise have been an option for them if in-person therapy was the only choice. I think accessibility is another benefit for clients. There are a lot of clients who live in more rural areas who now have access to a more diverse array of therapists. And this is especially important for those who need access to therapists who have particular areas of specialization or if clients are frequently traveling back and forth between two different states, having a telehealth therapist who's duly licensed in both of those states can allow for more continuous care that might not otherwise be possible if they were limited to in-person therapy sessions. Now, for therapists, travel time, I think, is also a benefit if people are working from perhaps in-home offices. I know a lot of people have decided, you know what, I don't think I need to pay for my office space anymore because I have a space that I can use from home where I can work. I know some therapists who have used online work to allow them to travel using either temporary licenses or becoming licensed in different states, or even just traveling within the jurisdiction in which they're already licensed. Or being duly licensed and doing telehealth has also allowed many therapists to travel back and forth between two different states throughout the year without interrupting their clinical work. So, for example, if someone's licensed in both Washington and Hawaii, they can spend their summers in Washington and their winters in Hawaii and still not interrupt their clinical work or their work with clients at all.
So actually, as the client perspective, when I see my person that I talk to, while I enjoy face-to-face, sometimes the 30 minutes back and forth can slow down my day. So I actually, as a client, not all the time, but many times prefer teletherapy. And I think, as we'll talk about today, I think client choice is important too. And that many people do it all one way. This is all going to be a teletherapy or all face-to-face, but a hybrid model could also work. And I have clients that are like that as well. And I have one colleague that is licensed in something like 13 states, and they market themselves as a long distance relationship expert. And as you said, you would not traditionally be able to work with a couple like this unless they were coming in on a visit. And now, provided you're licensed in the state, in the various states, that you can work with them and work in long distance relationships. We should also talk about families. There's many times we as MFTs do work with families in the teenager launches, but they go to college and they may not be with their family for those family sessions. So not just couple therapy, but family therapy when family members are in different locations, I think is also a great innovation that certainly I would not have been able to utilize before. So it lets me provide continuity of care, as you were saying, and to follow up in a more timely way with families, where if I was doing that before, it might have to be on a holiday break or over the summer when the families are together, which is a lot of time when therapists also take their vacation. So all of that is an amazing innovation of this telehealth for sure. Now, you were mentioning that you send the care package, which I think is an awesome idea. It eliminates another barrier for our clients. After now editing the book, tell us about some of your favorite clinical innovations, therapeutic creativity that can be used with relational clients virtually.
Yeah. So some of the interventions in the book are adaptations of in-person interventions that really show how can you adapt it specifically to work really well via telehealth. Others are new interventions that are created specifically for work via telehealth. But speaking to this first one, the adaptations of in-person interventions, one of the first classes that I taught when I returned from my maternity leave during the pandemic and I had to switch everything online was on systemic child and adolescent treatment. And for this class, one of the things that I traditionally did in that course was a play genogram. And I couldn't use the traditional toys that I normally had and would bring into the classroom or the figurines. And so I shifted the play genogram to a digital format using clip art and sharing my screen, which actually worked out really well. So this is one way of doing a traditionally in-person activity and shifting it and adapting it to an online format. Another thing that I had been doing in that class was using the Ungame card decks and the board game for in-person therapy role plays. And I transferred that to an online format as well, just using PowerPoint and putting the questions on PowerPoint. But what I found was that in shifting this to an online format, I was actually able to really more creatively engage in a strategic way. So for example, if you were working with clients who had a particular presenting problem, it would be pretty obvious if you added an extra question into the deck if you were in in-person therapy. But if you're shifting the questions to an online format, you can slip an extra question or two in there that's tailored towards something specifically that you might want to ask the family about and use that therapeutic game in a much more strategic way. Another activity that's in the book that I was pretty excited about, I had been assigning this article in my family systems theories class for years that was written by Maria Bermudez on alter making for grief and loss using a narrative approach. And when our university went completely online, I remember seeing this email coming through about a virtual board that had been created on like Canvas or something like that, where students could add photographs or write things to honor a loved one who had died during the pandemic. And this really made me wonder what Maria had been doing with her intervention since the pandemic and since some things had shifted online. And so I was interested if she was maybe willing to collaborate on a chapter explaining how to do an adaptation of this intervention for telehealth. And so I was really excited when she responded saying that she had interest in working on this chapter. And this is how this book was created and how my research worked, was just sending out calls for proposals, reaching out to specific people who had already been doing this work or who I thought might be able to adapt pre-existing interventions that they had already been doing to be really fitting for telehealth. Nathan Taylor, for example, and Paul Springer and colleagues have written about how to set up and conduct sculpting interventions via telehealth. This one sounds like it could be a pretty simple, okay, just have your clients sculpt their family and watch them over telehealth. It's actually a lot more nuanced than that. And this leads us back to the conversation that we were having about these initial conversations about how to set up your technology and your cameras. And so I just really loved what they had been doing and wrote about how to help clients set up the space to be able to do a sculpting intervention, how to set up the camera or perhaps shift the camera to a phone so that different people can hold the phone and show the therapist different views of the sculpt at different points in time when each client is talking about their experience. Some of the other interventions that I think are really neat and are fairly easy to use are based in websites or applications that have been created for therapists in doing online therapy. Karen Fried, for example, has a website where at the onset of the pandemic really wanted to create a resource for therapists who were now having to shift their work online. And she has an application where she photographed all of the puppets that were in her play therapy room and put them into this application where there are different backgrounds that users can select. They can make the images of the puppets move or do different things and interact with one another in different ways. She has a virtual dollhouse that you can use, and all of these are available online on her website for free. Jessica Stone has a virtual sand tray app that's really incredible and has this unique ability to change and add things both above the sand and below the sand in what she calls the underworld. Just a lot of really neat stuff that has been designed or adapted for online therapy. One example of a newer intervention that was designed specifically for teletherapy, Jacqueline Florian and I worked on a chapter on using online maps like Google Maps to illustrate and help clients discuss their migration journeys with other family members via telehealth, actually like mapping it out together and even zooming in or looking at images of parts of their journeys to be able to talk about that with other family members.
So much great stuff there. I was also thinking when you were talking about physical space, another advantage of teletherapy with couples and families, we get to see, and many times, the space where they actually live, where they practice their communication, their intimacy building. And so to really physically see that space, or where they're going to practice the work with us, but do most of the work outside of session, we have a sense of what that space looks like. So setting up that space, I think, is paramount. And this book leads to so many different ways of thinking. And as family therapists, as systemic thinkers, we look for isomorphs or parallel processes. So there's a lot of parallel processes. And as an educator, a trainer, a supervisor, as you and I both are, of how we model that for our students. You've already mentioned many times how the pandemic spurred you to move your teaching to online, which adjusted how you did your therapy online. What are your thoughts on supervision via telehealth?
Yeah, we actually have a number of chapters in that book that are specifically on supervision. So when the pandemic first started, I started adapting some of my work to doing virtual reflection teams in an online format, which was just a different creative way of being able to engage students or supervisees via online formats, and a different way to be able to engage clients too, where instead of the traditional in-person reflecting teams of being able to actually talk directly in front of clients, being able to record a message. Since you're already on the computer, you can hit record if you have all the right paperwork and everything set up for it. You can hit record and actually record a message to send back to clients, or record part of the discussion if that's something that clients are up for. Carlos Ramos and colleagues also have been doing plurilinguistic virtual reflection teams in supervision settings. So it's like adaptation, something a little bit different than the online reflecting teams that I had been doing. Deborah Miller and colleagues have been using deliberate practice in systemic teletherapy training and supervision, which is really neat. And then Dana Stone and colleagues also wrote a chapter on using simulation in virtual group supervision. So just a lot of unique things that I think you can do. Same thing as with therapy, that it doesn't just have to be talking at people. You can do supervision really creatively online as well.
What do you think we need to do as educators and clinical trainers to move the field forward? We've come so far in the 4 or 5 years since the pandemic. Where do we need to go as a field and far as training the MFTs of the future to do this relational work via telehealth?
I think that the first thing is really just making sure that telehealth is included in the curriculum. CAAMFT recently added some components to the requirements that specify the need for training for telehealth in CAAMFT accredited programs. Now, this looks different from program to program. Our program, for example, recently combed through each of our courses to identify the places where education on telehealth was included throughout the curriculum, and we identified some opportunities to enhance this. I think that training programs could really benefit from doing something like this. And this is actually one of the main reasons that I wanted to create the book, because there's a growing number of resources, but there's still few that are available specifically for teletherapy education. And my hope was that this book could be used in training programs to provide ideas for creative theory-based interventions that would be backed by existing research, or at least as much existing research as possible given what's out there, that could be used when working with an array of clients. Some folks have shared that they're planning on using this as a primary text in courses that are specifically designed for education on teletherapy. Others have shared that they have plans to integrate the text throughout different courses in their program when a telehealth specific course isn't offered. And I think that's key. I don't know that programs need to have a telehealth course in particular, but education does need to be integrated throughout the curriculum. So, for example, in courses that are designed to teach basic counseling and attending skills, trainees need to know how joining looks different in person versus online. And a critical part of advancing that training for systemic therapists for telehealth is actually practicing it. So even when I'm teaching in person, I try to include some components of practice that replicate situations in which therapists might not be working face-to-face with clients. I'll share an example. Last quarter, I was teaching a course on systemic assessment and conceptualization, and I had this aha moment 10 years into my graduate teaching career that students might actually need to practice talking to clients over the phone. I've been hearing from students for years that talking on the phone can be awkward for them. I know it can be for me too sometimes, since text is so much easier now. And I finally made this connection that I should have them practice this. So prior to role playing their initial intake session, I had them share their phone numbers with one another and had half of the class actually leave the classroom so that they could call one another on their cell phones and practice role-playing the initial phone call with clients. And this looks and feels different than face-to-face interactions or from virtual interactions in which you can actually see the faces of those that you're talking with.
Oh my gosh, so many good things in there. The book, again, is The Therapist Notebook for Systemic Teletherapy, Creative Interventions for Effective Online Therapy. And the artwork is really cool too.
I actually got to design, that was a friend. You don't normally get to design the covers, but a friend who is also a licensed marriage and family therapist, she designed it for.
Do you want to give her a shout out?
In particular. Oh yeah, the Christine Walsh-Borst, who, yes, out of the goodness of her heart and her passion for both creative endeavors and therapy as well, has done the artwork for us for that. I'm excited. Awesome. I think it's beautiful.
There's a cool looking couch on there with the rays of sunshine and some flowers. It's a pretty cool looking cover, which Routledge is a publisher of one of my books too. I didn't get the option to put the personalized art for that. It looks really good. And more importantly, it reads really well. As you can tell by this hour, our listeners, that it is full of practical adaptations and innovations. So whether you're using it to get more comfortable in doing this type of work, or whether you're an educator or supervisor using it in a training context, there's a lot in there for anyone that thinks systemically. Becky, as always, our listeners would like to continue the dialogue. What is the best way to continue the dialogue with you if they're interested?
Yeah, if anyone wants to reach out to me, email is probably the best way. Cobb, COBBR, @seattleu.edu.
Thank you so much, Becky Cobb. Eli, back with you, bringing to a close another informative installment of the AAMFT podcast. In addition to checking out Becky's new book from Routledge that we talked about, if you want more continuing education, AAMFT has you covered. Go to aamft.org, the Enhanced Knowledge tab, where you will see online education and training, which will take you to Teneo. That's AAMFT's online education system, CEUs on demand from leading figures in our great profession of MFT, systemic therapy. And there's plenty of technology, including teletherapy, telehealth related CEUs, things like ethics and supervisee technology uses, how technology will radically change MFT's future, incorporating technology to improve your practice, and logical follow-ups if you liked today's podcast, like online therapy, taking a not knowing position, telehealth, practical considerations for getting started, and utilizing telemental health, effective clinical practice, as well as ethical thinking in telehealth. So multiple choices. Obviously, if you are a member of AAMFT, there is a significant discount. Membership, as always, has its advantages. So you can get AAMFT remotely, and for the first time in several years, AAMFT face-to-face, the Systemic Family Therapy Conference at the world-famous Walt Disney Swan and Dolphin Resort, Orlando, Florida, November 4th through November 7th. It's coming up soon, my friends. If you have not been a part of the Systemic Family Therapy Conference in its online format the last few years, which has been wildly successful, you'll definitely want to join this year, as this is a comprehensive event providing systemic thinkers with personal and professional development, cutting-edge clinical skills and training, and a chance to see your friends again that maybe, if you're like me, you only see once, or if we're lucky, twice a year. And in a post-pandemic world, it's been longer than that for me. In the origin of the podcast, that's where I would conduct a lot of face-to-face interviews. If you listen to those first couple of seasons, our production qualities and my knowledge of podcasting and editing has improved greatly. Go to AAMFT.org, register today. The Systemic Family Therapy Conference, Orlando, Florida, November 4th through the 7th. Did you know that AAMFT is active on all your favorite social media channels? Be sure to follow us, the AAMFT, on Instagram, X, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And you want to stay up to date with everything going on in the world of AAMFT, you can always find the back installments of the podcast anywhere you find your favorite podcast. I am partial to Apple Podcast and Spotify, but it's on Google Play, Stitcher. So please, if you're new to us, check out back installments where we tackle the latest trends and events impacting the world of systemic therapy, like today. And I have a number of pioneer interviews, which is some of my favorite interviews to conduct over the years. You can drop me a line. I'm at Eli@NorthstarCounselingCenter.com. You can also find me at ELIKARAM.com, where you see everything going on in my world, including I have 2 books that are out. One for our young professionals, Marriage and Family Therapy, a National Exam, Your Guide for Success. That's from Springer. And that will prepare you for the national exam, including 360 practice questions, a full-length mock exam, proven strategies and tips for test taking, and it's organized to match the domains of the licensure exam. And then, if you're interested in these common factors that we always talk about on the show, including what makes a motivated client, how you build, nurture, and repair a therapeutic alliance, how you maximize your own therapist factors, you want to check out Bringing Common Factors to Life in Couple and Family Therapy from Rutledge. As always, thank you so much for listening. And until next time, my friends, stay safe, stay systemic.